This episode is brought to you by Netflix. From the co-director of Shrek and the visionary behind Toy Story comes Spellbound, a magical new animated adventure starring Rachel Zegler, John Lithgow, Jennifer Lewis, Nathan Lane, and Titus Burgess with Javier Bardem and Nicole Kidman. When a powerful spell turns her parents into monsters, Princess Elian must journey into the wild to reverse the curse before it's too late. Watch Spellbound, only on Netflix November 22nd.
Welcome to Mind Love, episode 310. Today's episode is all about the uncertainty advantage, navigating the unknown, harnessing possibility, and overcoming doubt.
But he said, I just started playing and following my curiosity, following my intuition. As I did that, it was funny because one question led to another, which led to another, and all the old ideas started to come back. And he said, that work for which I won the Nobel Prize on the wobble of electrons in orbit? That all started with that spinning plate in the Cornell dining hall. And I guess I just take a lot of comfort in that everybody doubts himself under uncertainty. Everybody doubts himself under hardship. And it's really, how do we listen to our curiosity and intuition as a guide and even play as a guide into what to do next?
And the best part is to trust that that's enough. I think that's what Aplom is about, is trusting that we are the person for the task before us, no matter what that is.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
If this is your first time giving your mind a little love, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Mind love is a habit, and the more you give your mind that love and intention, the better you'll feel about yourself and your life. Plus, it's really a win-win because more subscribers means Mind Love attracts even more amazing guests to bring you their wisdom, so don't forget to subscribe. When was the last time you felt the thrill of the unknown? That mix of excitement and nerves that makes you feel alive. If you can't even remember when you last felt that, don't worry, you're not alone. Most of us are creatures of habit. We like knowing what's around the corner. The unknown is scary and uncomfortable. It's, unknown. Until I was about 30, I prided myself on my spontaneity. It wasn't uncommon for me to accept an invite to fly to Japan 3 days later. Yes, that actually happened. I rarely knew where I was sleeping from one night to the next. Not that that's something to be particularly proud of. Well, as I've aged, or maybe matured, I've realized the power in structure. My morning and evening routines fuel me. Time blocking helps me get twice as much done. As a mom, I've learned to fill my limited free time with things that will actually move me forward. But as amazing as structure can be for making sure I schedule in what's important to me, the day-to-day can start to feel a little monotonous. The certainty that structure brings can also end up being limiting. For one, planning can start looking like procrastination. And for two, if you keep really narrow-focused goals, you can miss opportunities for something better that you didn't even think of. And for three, it's kind of hard to be creative when you have it all planned out all the time. When I was first exploring entrepreneurship, I'd get all caught up in the learning and the knowing. I had not yet heard the saying, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, so I let it do just that. Well, you know what happened? I got stuck. I got so wrapped up in the planning, the prepping, that I couldn't move forward. I was procrastinating under the guise of productivity. Until Mind Love. With this one, I did something different. I still researched and planned and prepped, but I focused these efforts towards a different stage in the process. Instead of finding a great business idea and over-researching every single step in the development process, I spent that time researching me. What I loved, what I was good at, what people saw in me, what I was endlessly curious about. I researched who I truly was so that I could build a business in alignment with that. And from that foundation, I allowed space for the magic of the unknown. I made sure I knew my next step and trusted that the one after that would be revealed when it needed to be. So I do believe there's a balance. The problem is, most people don't even realize that their so-called comfort zones are actually quite uncomfortable. They're kind of miserable, but at least they know what to expect, right? The what-ifs are too scary to think about. What if I fail? What if people think it's stupid? What if I waste my time? But if you look into the tunnel of the unknown with a different mindset, you open up to, what if I completely transform my life? What if I discover a joy that I never accessed before? What if I change someone else's life? What if I change a lot of lives? And I totally get that not all uncertainty is chosen. We'll talk about that later. But wouldn't it be awesome to be able to confidently manage all of it? When life throws you a curveball, you just gracefully pick it up and keep playing the game? Or who knows, you even learn to throw your own curveballs when what you're doing isn't making you happy. Well, today we're making friends with the unknown. We're choosing to see it as a playground of possibility instead of something to be afraid of. Our guest is Nathan and Susanna Furr, the authors of The Upside of Uncertainty. Susanna is a designer and art historian, and Nathan Furr is a strategy and innovation professor and a recognized expert in the fields of innovation and technology strategy. 3 key things we will learn are the connection between uncertainty, self-doubt, and imposter syndrome, the power of framing in influencing our preferences and choices, and how to overcome fear and step into the unknown to experience transformational moments. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up or text the word morning to 33777. And now let's welcome Nathan and Susanna Furr to the show.
Thank you for having us.
We're happy to be here.
So what inspired your book on reframing the idea of uncertainty?
Well, it's a couple things. I mean, so I'm a professor at INSEAD, which is global business schools, one of the top business schools. I did my PhD like 20 years ago at Stanford. And I was so interested in innovation and how do new ideas happen. And one of the things I noticed in, over these 20 years of interviewing innovators and change makers is that we celebrate these exciting new things they do, the innovations, the breakthroughs, but we rarely talk about this thing that always preceded the breakthrough or the change. And that is uncertainty, that they had to step into the unknown. They had to take a risk. And I'll be honest, that's not something that comes naturally to me. So at first it was just kind of trying to pick up tips for myself. And then it evolved into really a research question and a series of interviews trying to understand, what do we learn from these folks about how to face uncertainty well, how to take that important risk?
That is such a good question, because I feel like there's a lot of frameworks for success that end up skipping a lot of really important parts of it that we all get caught up in, but then it's like, oh, well, there's no handbook on this. So how am I supposed to approach it? Is this self-doubt normal? Or does everyone feel this lost, or that there's so many options? And one thing that I read in your book that when I read it, I was like, oh, I know this to be true, and also was surprised by it, is that uncertainty has been rising steadily over recent decades. Is that true? What's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I should clarify, my whole career is about uncertainty and asking, what are the tools and frameworks for a world of uncertainty? And I've done that more in kind of a innovation and strategy framework. And so this was the first time to really tackle it personally. But to ask, why would that be happening? Is that really happening? Maybe I could kind of identify a few fundamental drivers. One is the role of technology. I mean, technology has really brought down the barriers to create, transact, and interact so that it's easier today than ever before to share your idea, create a new business, to invent. And so that means there's a lot more turbulence as more people are participating, more creations are being made. And one side of that is the uncertainty, right? But the other side of that is the possibility. It's also true that, the root of innovation is just recombining ideas. And so as we have become more open as a society to include more people with different perspectives, we're actually getting more ideas. And And I guess maybe one more positive factor for me is the role of education. I mean, when we look at like the role of modern education, what does it really do? It helps people to engage in abstract thinking. That is to help them recombine ideas. So, for example, there was this fascinating study they did when the old USSR fell apart, and they were able to see people who lived in the modern world but who had never been exposed to modern education. And they would give them experiments like, here's a bird, a gun, a bullet, and a knife. How are these the same or different? And you and I say right away, well, one's an animal, one's a tool, because we've learned that abstract thinking. They hadn't learned that. They would just be like, well, wait, they're all the same. They're all together. They all have to be used together. That ability to think abstractly actually allows us to create new things. In fact, they have to recalibrate the IQ test every 10 years to bring it back to a norm of to a median score, because we keep creeping up on the IQ test. And so I view it as a lot of positive things. Obviously, there are negative things, where we talk about inflation and climate change and war, and those things are part of it too. But I just want to emphasize that part of it is because there's more possibility than ever before.
I'd love to jump in really quick and explain why I joined Nathan. So we are a married couple, and we actually met at university as freshmen and started on a research project together. So being researchers together is definitely a normal and fun way for us to interact with each other. But I joined this book because I love uncertainty. So where Nathan was more stressed about it, I had started a clothing line, and I currently am also still doing entrepreneurial things. For me, uncertainty has this feeling of excitement around it. But one thing I noticed is when Nathan was sitting down to write this book, because as he said, he had started studying it way back at Stanford. And so it was a topic that was important in our own personal relationship and in the way we were raising our kids, the way we decided to move to France when we had a 16-year-old who was in high school. We had learned, and I especially had learned, everything we truly loved about our lives had only come because we were kind of willing to do things a little bit differently, often than, our peers or the cohort that we were around. We kept saying, wait, though, this is good, but like, what if we could do this or that? And so sometimes, much to our parents or siblings' frustration, we just kept wanting to tweak things and make things more interesting. But so this is what happened. Nathan had this opportunity when COVID happened to sit down and write this book because he was just racing around doing a lot of work. And I witnessed him. He was thinking, okay, I've got to write this book. I've got to get these ideas down. And what was fun is the moment when we realized, okay, let's team up and write this book together. And what I wanted to come across, and I feel like it did, was we wrote to the human inside the manager. Because as you've noticed, a lot of the experiences in the book are about business. They're in a business setting or an entrepreneurial setting. And the fun thing for people that maybe think, oh, but I don't like those kind of books. What's so cool is the things that these people learn in those settings are so applicable to anyone, to any age, to any, to kids, like our kids in college. They're giving copies to their friends, because really our message is uncertainty hits us at, kind of our reptilian brain. We don't like it. We're wired to fear it. And when we realize that uncertainty, like Nathan said at the beginning, is just a portal basically to possibility, we often say it's one side of the coin, but you've got to go through uncertainty to get to that possibility. So together, this book really became about reframing uncertainty as possibility and also talking about it in a personal way. So talking about it like you too can get better at this.
I definitely dealt with uncertainty when I was starting my business. I deal with it whenever I'm pivoting or launching a new product or anything really. But I've also dealt with it when deciding whether or not we wanted to have kids and when we move somewhere new. And so there's so many of these tools that are applicable in all life situations. And it's funny because when I was reading your book, I kept having to reflect and ask myself, how do I even deal with uncertainty now? Because I've always had this story that I was great with it and I loved taking risks and I lived very spontaneously. But the older I get and maybe the more stability, I'm almost using air quotes on that. I don't even know if it's the right word, that I like pack around my life or the things that feel like they need stability, like having kids and building businesses together and acquiring more furniture for our home, all of those things, I'm realizing I don't know if I'm so great at it anymore. I definitely have a lot of thought processes that that stop me from taking certain kinds of risks, if that makes sense.
hmm That's an interesting and a relatable thing. I think sometimes it's easier when we don't have a lot of, like, especially kids, but like even before we're married or before, when we're still making decisions that don't have so much weight attached, it can be easier to be a little bit more risky. But actually, that's one of the fun things to just we want people to do is reflect, like, hey, are you having enough uncertainty in your life? Not that, every uncertainty is great. There are a lot that if we can avoid them, we should. And we like to recommend, risk and uncertainty. We see those as different things. Do you want to, Nathan's so good at explaining that difference.
I don't know why it took me so long to invest in good bedding. I resisted it for years, but something flipped in me about 3 years ago. And now I'm basically a pillow connoisseur. I've tried them all, and I get weirdly excited about good bedding. Because here's the thing, we spend a third of our lives in bed, and the quality of that time affects literally everything else, which is why I'm so excited to tell you about my latest obsession, Lagoon Sleep Pillows. What sets them apart is their matching system. You take a quick 2-minute quiz about your sleep style and your preferences, and then they match you with your perfect pillow. I was matched with their Otter pillow, and I am so impressed. Lately, I've just needed more support, and this seems to cradle me in all the right places. I'm also low-key obsessed with their travel pillow, which I use for way more than just travel. I actually hug it, use it as leg support, and of course, take it on trips with me. Well, the secret is in their adjustable fill. You can add or remove it to get that perfect alignment for your spine. A study even found that the right supportive pillow can improve sleep quality by 63%. And Lagoon lets you try their matched pillow for 100 nights risk-free. Free returns, no questions asked. Falling asleep has never been easier. I toss and turn less and just wake up feeling refreshed every morning. Go to lagoonsleep.com and take their awesome 2-minute sleep quiz to find your match. Use the code MIND for 15% off your first purchase. You know what's interesting about mindfulness? It's not just about being present in the moment. It's about being thoughtful about the future. We meditate, we exercise, we work on ourselves, all to create a better tomorrow, right? But there's one piece of the future planning puzzle that nobody likes to talk about. I get it. Life insurance feels heavy. But here's the thing. Just like meditation is an act of self-care, getting life insurance is an act of family care. It's about making sure your love continues to support your family, even when you're not there to do it yourself. That's why I want to tell you about Select Quote. They're one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience helping over 2 million customers. Their licensed insurance agents work for you to tailor a life insurance policy for your individual needs in as little as 15 minutes. And here's what's cool. They actually reward you for taking care of yourself. If you're in good health, they work with carriers that could get you same-day coverage for up to $5 million. No medical exam required. And it's way more affordable than you might think. You could even get coverage for up to $1 million for as little as $20 per month. We just did this all recently after putting it off for years, and I can't tell you the peace of mind just from getting it done. So get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/mindlove. Go to selectquote.com/mindlove today to get started. That's selectquote.com/mindlove.
Risk and uncertainty, we see those as different things. Do you want to, Nathan's so good at explaining that difference.
Yeah, risk is where, this is kind of silly, but the formal definitions, risk is where the variables involved and the probability distribution. You just don't know what value you're going to get. So think of like rolling 2 dice. You're going to get between 2 and 12. You don't know which number you're going to get. The chances of getting a 7, for example. But uncertainty is where we don't know and where we don't have the information. And so it can scare us, and I guess what I would push you on is I imagine you learned to take those risks because you learned that good things came out of it, that, it didn't always play out, but a lot of times a smart risk with an affordable loss is what we call it, meaning it's okay if it doesn't work out. You didn't bet everything in the universe on it. That those tend to play out and make your life more interesting. I think the dilemma that you're feeling is a dilemma a lot of people feel, because I think we live in a culture that says the best thing is to be certain and safe. And we can follow that kind of cultural logic and intuitive logic, because again, uncertainty is making us nervous. So we're thinking, well, it feels better to take the safe path, doesn't it? We can follow that too far to the point where our lives get so stable and so boring that we actually crave something new to happen. So we, in the upside of uncertainty, we wrote about 42 different tools, and we organized those around this kind of metaphor of a first aid cross for uncertainty, or 4 things to do in the face of uncertainty. But one of those, is the first category of things is reframing things, reframing the uncertainty from something scary to see that there's 2 sides to uncertainty. One is the part we don't know, but the other part is the possibility. And one of the funniest tools for me that you made me think of is this idea of reverse insurance. So I did an interview with, because we were interested in risk and uncertainty, right? So we did an interview with the head of a national gambling organization. They're all about risk. And I asked him about this question. He said, you know what we call what we do between us? Reverse insurance. I'm like, what do you mean? Because we all know what insurance is. We buy it to make sure everything's safe. He's like, we're reverse insurance. We are the customer who loves us most is that person whose life has become so certain and therefore so boring that they will pay us for the chance that something new can happen. And so I think it's, there are times of life where it's appropriate to have, more stability. When you have, young kids, it's hard on them to be, gallivanting around the world. But on the other hand, we got to remember that we as human beings, as much as we fear the uncertainty, we also crave it. And it brings novelty into our life. It brings learning into our life. It brings change in our life that makes us better. And so if we try to squeeze it all out, we squeeze out the learning and the change as well. And that's just a fact. Like, I hate to say it, but like in my field, we have empirical studies that show this at like the organization level. A good colleague of mine, a friend of mine, when she did her PhD at Harvard, she studied this in companies, and she found that the companies that had instituted these quality standards like ISO 9000 to squeeze out every potential error, every mistake, they succeeded at that. But they also killed in the process all the innovation, all the chance. And so, we can, one way a colleague of ours framed it is error creation versus error elimination. We all love to eliminate errors, but we forget that sometimes an error is the source of a new insight, a new learning. Sometimes that's what we call innovation. And, when we talk about where's innovation come from, it's trying something new. And so we have to allow that space for that.
Yeah, you made a point in your book about how humans need uncertainty. And when you think of it like that, then it definitely becomes a lot more of a priority. But when you were speaking, what I was reminded of is my interview that I did a while back with Mel Robbins. She has a new book called, newish book now, called The High Five Habit. And the whole thing is around pattern interrupt. And it's the same concept of like, brushing your teeth with your left hand and then trying to learn at the same time. Just doing that other thing that you don't normally do while trying to learn will help you learn this new thing. So her whole concept, when you give yourself a high five, it sounds ridiculous and silly and you feel weird doing it. But when you're like coupling it with something like affirmations or telling yourself something that you're going to do that day, and then you give yourself the high five, just because you've done that weird thing that interrupts your pattern, it's more likely to stick and actually penetrate your mind in a different way. So you remember whatever you're trying to learn, or you actually do the thing you're telling yourself to do.
That's so interesting. I hadn't heard about that, but I could believe it.
Melissa, I want to be careful here because I want to just acknowledge we've been talking about uncertainty this whole time, by the way, as if it's this wonderful thing. And we really did in the book address 2 kinds of uncertainty. The one we've been talking about mostly is the kind of uncertainty you choose, like when you took a risk to start your business or launch a new product. And that's scary for us to try something new. Or when you're talking about pattern interrupting and just trying something new, that's all stuff you choose. But I also want to be careful. I want to acknowledge early that there is uncertainty that happens to us that we didn't choose. So in contrast to planned uncertainty, there's unplanned uncertainty. So like when COVID hits us all, and we all hate that. And so what I would just say, the other big kind of half of the book, the other half of this uncertainty toolkit is about facing up to those unpleasant things that nobody wants to have happen. I mean, it's you wouldn't choose that hand of cards, but now that you've been dealt it, what do you do? And so I want to just be careful to acknowledge that for some people listening, they can just be disconnected. Like, what are you talking about? Uncertainty. I have so much uncertainty in my life. I hate it. I wish my life weren't going this way. And I just want to say one of the great things about the way the world worked for us, I guess the possibility so the whole thesis of the book is uncertainty and possibility are two sides of the same coin. So that's even true for unplanned uncertainty. So when I was writing this book and Susanna joined in, COVID hit, right? And all of my income, all of my work is from teaching and speaking. And we have, 4 older kids, 3 of them in university. So we got university fees. We'd just taken the risk to buy an apartment. And I had told Susanna, if a recession doesn't happen in a year, we'll be okay. And what happened was way worse than that. Like my calendar emptied out, full calendar emptied out in 5 days. And I was freaking out like everybody was, right? But I was staying up late, worrying. I was getting up early worrying. And Susanna really pushed me. She said, if you can't use these tools to help yourself, like you don't get to write this book. You're just a hypocrite. And I was like, dang it, you're right. And we've had a lot of other crazy things happen to us that we're happy to share with you. But I just wanted to really quickly interject and say that this is also about facing up to that uncertainty.
I see what you mean. I am in the perspective that even when something happens that we don't ask for, the only thing we can really do is reframe the way we're looking at it. Like if we don't have any other control around it, then the control that we have is our perspective or how we respond to it. But I will say that over the last decade, I've become, I think, what you guys would describe as a learned optimist, which was one of your tools. And so I love the whole reframing section of your book. But I want to ask you, you talked about how you have so many tools, but they're in about 4 different categories. What are those categories to help us at least increase our ability to deal with uncertainty, and why did you choose them?
Yeah, as Nathan said, the fact that there were 42, we knew we had to make those somehow more manageable for people. So we did take the first aid cross as an international symbol for help and for okay, good, this is where I need to go. And so there's 4 arms of that cross. And the first section is that northern arm. So we actually have a little symbol to go with it, which is like a compass or a North Star. And it's the reframe category. And we've already been talking about that a lot. And I loved what you just said about in those moments of hard uncertainty, it's really sometimes the only thing we have is our ability to decide how we're going to look at that and deal with it, and even how we're going to reframe our own abilities. So reframe tools, there's like 9 or 10, but they're all around this idea of helping the reader to get this idea, wow, could this uncertainty hold any possibility? And could I be perfectly capable of navigating this? And so we help people reframe themselves, which we call aplomb. So one of the tools is reframing self-doubt, first embracing it and realizing this is normal. Everybody has this. In fact, 70% of people suffer from imposter syndrome. So reframing tools are about seeing the possibility on the other side of the uncertainty. And then on that left arm of the cross, it's the prime tools. And we picked that category really intentionally because priming is another way of preparing, but it's this cool activity you do before you're going to do something else. So there's some action involved, and priming ourselves for uncertainty is actually about getting more self-knowledge, but also situational awareness. And so it's tools like knowing what kind of risks are your aversions categories and knowing which ones you actually like, that you enjoy and don't even consider a risk. So it's a lot of tools for getting ready. And probably the one we share most often is the uncertainty balancer tool, which is where you want to inject some cozy, certain things like rituals or routines that you can count on so that it's less stressful for you when you are going up against uncertainty. And then the right-hand side of that cross is the do tool. So the best way to take action under uncertainty is to start to do things, to have a vote, to think about what you might be able to do and get going on it. But there are ways that are better to do it than others. And then at the bottom of the cross is the category we called sustain. because we really feel, in fact, that reframe and sustain, if you think about it as the north-south axis, they're similar because they're a cognitive moment. They're a reframing moment where sustain tools come in handy when things go differently than you would have hoped or liked, because that is a fact. With uncertainty, things will go differently than you planned. And it's the tools that help you endure those hard moments, the ways that you, again, reframe like, well, wait a minute, what did I learn from this? And so people who navigate uncertainty well are able to sustain themselves even when things go totally wrong, in quotes.
I want to go back to the reframe section just because that's one of my favorite things to do. I'm always talking about my Rolodex of mindsets. Like a lot of times I'm like, I don't feel good in this moment. How am I thinking about this? All right, find a different way to think about it. Yeah, that one still doesn't feel good. Let me just find a different one. And I just go through them until I land on one that I'm like, all right, you know what? This one makes me feel safer, or it makes me feel bolder, or whatever it is that I'm trying to feel. And I think that a lot of people don't realize that they have that power, or it's like, just pick a new way. Yeah, you may have never thought about it like that before, but can you convince yourself to? Because it might actually do you good. And so we talked about the reverse insurance, which I thought was really cool. But the next one that you guys brought up was around frontiers, which you described as the boundary between the known and the unknown. What are some of the examples of small and big frontiers, and how can we learn to explore them?
Melissa, I love that question. And I just want to, when you say I try on different mindsets and people are like, does that really work? I mean, it can sound kind of soft from the outside, but I just want to underscore there's a very deep foundation of empirical evidence in psychology and behavioral economics for the power of this framing, which is essentially the way you describe something changes how you think, decide, and act. And so, like, we're talking, Nobel Prize winning research by Kahneman and Tversky. And I think it's so important to highlight because what they did in this experiment, they did an experiment where they gave a situation where there's a disease and you have two treatments. Treatment A has a 95% chance of success and treatment B, a 5% chance of failure. And we know those are statistically identical, but nonetheless, we all want the 95% chance of success, even though we know it's the same. It's because we're wired by evolution to fear uncertainty, to fear loss, and to be gain seeking. And that's so important for this dilemma of uncertainty possibility. Because if there are two sides of the same coin and you're framing everything in terms of the uncertainty, you will run away from the uncertainty, but at the same time run away from the possibility. So that's why this is so important. And so what Frontiers is about is just helping us to rethink what the boundary between what we know and don't know really is. So one of my favorite stories is we did this interview with David and Claire Hyatt, and they had been very successful in their careers, had worked in advertising, had created a clothing brand that they sold to Timberland. They moved out to this very rural part of the UK to kind of raise a family, and they just, kind of wondering, what do we want to do next? And what they realized is that the town they had moved to, which was like 4,000 people, had once been the jeans manufacturing headquarters of the UK. But 20 years ago, those jobs had fled to lower cost overseas locations, leaving behind a lot of economic ruin and social problems. And they kind of sat there and thought, well, gosh, we know how to do clothing brands. These people know how to make jeans, but that's scary to restart a business in a place where it's already failed. That's a frontier. And when we talk to them about how did they overcome that fear of stepping into that unknown space, David was very clear. He said, listen, you can only do your best work when you're at the frontier. Now, think about that for a moment. Like, how many frontiers are there in your life? They're all over. There's career, there's relationship, there's education, there's entertainment, there's physical. I mean, there's intellectual, there's emotional. I mean, we could go on, right? And if you think about it, how often do you stay back from the frontier? You do the thing that's familiar and easy because it's comfortable. But if you say, wait a minute, maybe the frontier is where I would do my best work, then suddenly trying something new looks really different. And sometimes the big impact things can be small. And I'll just share a personal example. I had been traveling internationally. I fly back home And a friend of ours, she's the dean of the Performing Arts School at NYU, so credible person, has invited us to a ballet. Now, I'm jet lagged. I'm tired. Like, I don't really want to go to a ballet, to be honest. I just want to get some rest. And, it's an older ballet called Giselle. It's like, yeah. But she's like, oh, you've got to come to this. This is really special. So we go. And it turns out they had invited, it was the English National Ballet. They'd invited this gentleman, Akram Khan, comes from Bangladesh, who had integrated these dance styles from northern India into this very traditional romantic narrative ballet and put it in a setting of this, garment factory and these migrant workers who had been left out of work. I mean, it was, when we talk about innovation, it was like the epitome of innovation, recombining, rethinking, reimagining, but it was also incredibly moving. I mean, I walked out of that transformed, like the way I think about my life and my purpose. And that would have never happened if I would have just stayed with the comfortable, I'll just, take a nap and do my routine. And I think that I share that example because it's not every time that something transformational happens, but we only get those transformational moments when we step onto the frontier. And so I would encourage people to think about their life and the frontier in their lives, and not to step on every frontier, but to ask, we kind of intuitively know where we're playing far back, or maybe we've been invited by somebody or by, our work or by another organization to step on the frontier and to follow that, say, maybe could that be where I do my best work? And this applies to organizations as well. I won't go over those examples right now, but organizations have frontiers. And I have many stories of organizations doing their best work when they actually stepped onto the frontier, the boundary of what they know and don't know.
You know what's funny? We spend so much time feeding our minds, reading books, listening to podcasts, learning new things, but then we grab whatever's convenient to feed our bodies. And I get it. Life is busy, and sometimes a drive-through feels like the only option. But that's why I take Field of Greens. It's a greens powder made with whole organic fruits and vegetables. No extracts, no lab-made stuff, and just 1 scoop a day gives you simple, real nutrition. Field of Greens feeds your body with fruits and vegetables medically chosen to support your heart, vital organs, and immune system. And let me tell you something. Since I started taking it, I've noticed these little changes that show me how nutrient depleted I must have been before. Like the ridges in my nails, gone. My sleep, so much better. And my stomach just feels happy. You know that dreaded afternoon crash that has you reaching for more coffee or sugary snacks? Well, that's not happening for me anymore. When your body is actually nourished, it runs so much better. I've tried other greens powders before, but Field of Greens is genuinely different. The quality is next level and you can taste it. It's become my go-to, especially on those days when my eating isn't exactly Instagram worthy, because we all have those days, right? And here's the thing. They are so confident that you'll love it too, that they offer a 100% money-back guarantee. That's how much they believe in their product. So I got you 15% off your first order and free rush shipping. Visit fieldofgreens.com and use promo code MINDLOVE. That's promo code MINDLOVE at fieldofgreens.com. fieldofgreens.com.
And just to have a funny little version of frontiers, we have our kids always make fun of us because we're always talking about the tools and giving them ideas. But we went to this crepe restaurant in Normandy, and all of a sudden I said, okay, guys, but are you just going to get the ham and cheese, or do you kind of want to get on a frontier? And one of our kids was like, let's go for the frontier. And it was silly, but he ordered this crepe that was walnuts and pear and blue cheese. And it became his new go-to crepe that he's like, it sounded so weird. And I was scared to do it. Some of our kids are picky eaters. So sometimes a frontier can even be like, just stop eating the same stuff every time. Like, order a different pizza. You might find your new favorite thing.
Yeah, I like that example because, again, it's one of those like with age, I'm like, well, I know my favorites. I did a lot of exploring before, but now I'm living in the same spot for longer than I ever have. And I can feel myself settling it in. So it takes that conscious decision to keep approaching those frontiers. I'm reminded of in my early 20s, I worked for a number of companies and startups, and I was the one who always came into the company, and it's like I had this loop in my mind of like the infomercial one-liner, there's got to be a better way. And so I was constantly like looking at all the processes and I'm like, is there a way to automate this? Like, why are you guys doing this the hard way? And so I became the chief of efficiency in 2 different companies by like figuring out new ways to do things. But the only question I was asking myself was, is there a better way to do this? It's not like I knew the better way ever. That was just my entry level question of like kind of popping in like, okay, what can I research? What can I search? What do I know exists that might be applied to this as well? And that's more of a business example, but it doesn't take that much to just challenge the way that you're thinking about things, or even just like your morning routine. Do I feel good all morning with this routine? Is this morning routine still working for me? It worked last year, but is it still what I need today? Like just self-reflective questions can kind of open doors to new ways of looking at things or doing things.
Absolutely. Those are great questions to ask because they'll lead you to frontiers that are worthwhile. Again, we never want people to feel like, oh no, they told me I've got to get on all the frontiers at once. I mean, that's not what we're saying.
I just want to throw in there too, since we're kind of talking around this reframe section of tools. I mean, you did mention right when we opened up, you said something really interesting. Like you said, well, when I go into something, and I feel some self-doubt, do other people feel that too? And, Susanna kind of touched on that a little bit when she mentioned that 70% of people struggle with feeling imposter syndrome. Like, well, like maybe I'm not legit, and what we share that it's at least 70%. We share that because one of the things uncertainty can do is it makes you feel like you're out of your element. It can make you doubt yourself. And so one of the tools we wrote about was called a plum, which, is this really great image from the old French of like a plumb line, like something that's straight. And it's more, we used it as this kind of construction-y metaphor of like realizing that things are, even if they don't feel as solid as you'd like, that's kind of normal. So one of the fascinating things is when you really dug in behind the scenes of some people who have done some really amazing things, they too felt a lot of self-doubt. And, if I could, I just got to share one of my personal heroes is Richard Feynman, who won the Nobel Prize in physics and is kind of one of the pioneers of quantum physics. And I love him because he was curious but he struggled so much. He kind of, this was an earlier era, and he was part of the Manhattan Project, this race to kind of end the war. And he rolled out of that project totally exhausted. That he was married, but the love of his life passed away due to tuberculosis just a few years before they found the treatment for it. So he kind of rolls out really just beaten up, but not realizing it. They didn't really have the language to talk about kind of exhaustion and burnout, but that's what he was. He didn't know it. He gets this job at Columbia University because physicists are in high demand, and he's teaching his classes, but professors are supposed to do research. And he starts feeling really bad about himself because he's like, I don't have any ideas anymore, and I don't have any interest in doing research anymore. And so he would literally go at night to the library and read 1001 Arabian Nights. Again, physicists are in high demand, so he starts getting letters inquiring, offering him jobs. And he said every letter he got made him feel worse because he's like, they don't know that I'm a total fake, that I can't do research. And then finally, he gets this letter of letters. It's from the Princeton Institute of Energy, where Einstein works and von Neumann work, like the legends of the field. And it made him feel so crazy about himself, so bad about himself, that he said, I give up. I no longer am responsible for living up to people's expectations of what they think I should be. I'm going to quit doing physics. I'm just going to have fun. I'm going to do what interests me. And he says within the week, he was in the dining hall and somebody was goofing around and threw one of the Cornell plates up in the air. And the Cornell plates have a little Cornell University emblem in the center. And he notices that the plate is up in the air. It's spinning and wobbling, and that the plate is wobbling at a different rate than the logo is spinning. Again, only a physicist would notice this, right? But he's like, maybe I could calculate that. So he goes away and he works it out, and he goes and shows it to his department chair, who Hans Bethe, who also won a Nobel Prize. And Hans Bette's like, Feynman, what are you doing? You're wasting your time. Who cares? This isn't important. And Feynman's like, yeah, that's right. Who cares? But he said, I just started playing and following my curiosity, following my intuition. As I did that, it was funny because one question led to another, which led to another, and all the old ideas started to come back. And he said, that work for which I won the Nobel Prize on the wobble of electrons in orbit, that all started with that spinning plate in the Cornell dining hall. And I guess I just take a lot of comfort in that everybody doubts himself under uncertainty. Everybody doubts himself under hardship. And it's really, how do we listen to our curiosity and intuition as a guide and even play as a guide into what to do next?
And the best part is to trust that that's enough. I think that's what Aplom is about, is trusting that we are the person for the task before us, no matter what that is.
One of the ways I love looking at things is that if I have an idea, there's something about it that's meant for me. But if I don't act on it, the idea is going to float to someone else. So I just like that because it's enough pressure, but also not too much to where it gets me caught in my own head. And I love what you say about play, because I have done a few different episodes around curiosity and the importance of things like awe and play. And the research is pretty clear that we have to make space for our own creativity. And we think of it as wasting time. But one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about now that I have a toddler and a newborn is it's like we want to be entertaining them all the time. But boredom is so good for you at any age, because then it gives you the space to start coming up with your own ideas. And if we are always watching, scrolling, or even what we think as productive, reading, researching, learning, then we're still just consuming over creating. And so sometimes, especially if we haven't been doing it regularly, we have to just, like, my version of making that space is sometimes time blocking a half hour for creativity and just like laying on the floor until I come up with an idea of something to do. Let my mind wander, go on a walk without an audiobook or a podcast, which is probably a suggestion against my own interest at this moment, but it's just so good for you to be able to just allow space for those ideas, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we do live in a world that technology does many good things, but one of the hard things it can do is it can just fill our every moment. It's funny because at the end, towards the end of the book, when we talk about this chapter around this section around sustaining, which is more about when things go differently than you expected, how do you keep up your hope and your enthusiasm? It's funny, we did that whole section differently. So instead of like having like 10 tools, we just organized it into 3 categories. And 3 categories were emotional hygiene, recognizing that having a setback and the uncertainty brings challenging emotions, and realizing that just like we have to do physical hygiene for our bodies, we have to do emotional hygiene, which is care for ourselves. And you took a risk. Don't beat yourself up and say, oh, I was so stupid. Why didn't I see that? No, treat yourself well, bandage that wound and say, you know what, that was brave of me to try. And maybe it didn't work this time, but maybe next time. And so emotional hygiene is one. The second is reality check, which is using this whole set of, psychology-based tools to kind of reason about the situation and see it differently. But the third category, which was, at Susanna's pushing and was hard for me to call it this, we called it magic. And by magic, we didn't mean, Harry Potter. We meant those leaps of insight, those moments of serendipity, those fortuitous chances. And we wrote, one of the last tools we wrote about was called, What Are the Texts You Live By? And I like that one because, my field of technology, Brian Arthur is a very famous professor who defined technology as a phenomenon put to use. And in that sense, everything around us is a technology, right? The coffee you drink is a phenomenon put to use. You drink it, you get the caffeine, it gives you energy. But so are other things like, let's be honest, painting, music, art. And one of the things we really encourage people to do is we encourage them to think about the balance of technologies in our lives. It's so easy to fill our lives up with email, text, podcast, Netflix, Instagram, whatever these. I call them low techs because the cause effect relationship is very clear. It's like coffee. You drink the coffee, you're going to get like a hit of energy. You open your email, you're going to get like a little endorphin buzz because you got new stuff or something like that, or maybe it's depressing, whichever way it goes for you. But high techs are those things that they have a more amorphous cause effect relationship. I mean, you could walk into a museum and like an hour later, you don't feel a thing. And you're like, maybe I wasted my time. And then you walk up to that one painting, or like I did, I went to that performance of Giselle, and it like is transformational, and you have a leap. You are not going to get a leap, I'm sorry, from Instagram. The founders of Instagram are my students. Love those folks, but you're not going to get a leap from Instagram. You're going to get it from these high techs. And so I like to say that low techs help us live. That's okay, but don't let them totally take over your life, because high techs, again, I mean music, poetry, literature, art, philosophy, they teach us how to live, why to live, what to live for. And so what I would add to that, which you've been talking about, is the blank space for those things, those moments of insight to connect, to spark.
Add $179 million in total cash prizes.
Mom, what are you doing?
Mix in 3 parts bills, bonus boxes, and multipliers.
Is this some kind of recipe?
Gradually stir in a ton of excitement.
Oh, you're trying to make Ohio Lottery holiday scratch-offs, aren't you? Stop overcomplicating things. Just go buy all your favorites like Holiday Cash, Holiday Lucky Times 10, and Merry Money.
Oh, that is easier.
Uh-huh.
Now help sift non-winning tickets into My Lotto Rewards for a second chance to win.
Play Holiday Scratch-Offs. Lottery players are subject to Ohio laws and condition regulations. Play responsibly.
I actually found the magic section to be my favorite section of the whole book. And so I'm really glad that you named it that, because that drew my eyes right there. I'm like, ooh, where's the magic in this? Because there's so many things that we think of as just concepts. And there's 2 episodes that I've done before. Episode 137 was on conscious luck, how to actually create your own luck. And episode 153 was about creating your own luck with a mindset around serendipity. And what I loved about those is they actually brought science to the idea of luck. And just like you were saying, we have to make room for the opportunities for those things to happen. And so if we're like, oh, I don't believe in magic of the universe, it's like, well, are you getting out of the house, or are you just Netflix binging the whole time? I would stop believing in magic too. And so the space for that, I think, is so important to remember. But one of the things that we talked about a few minutes ago was, I was talking about how as I've grown, I can feel where I'm willing to take risks changing a little bit. And one of the things that you talked about in your prime section was about understanding your risk profile. And I want to touch on that, because we're all different as to where we feel comfortable doing these things, where we need to maybe expand our risk tolerance, as you talk about. And so why is it important to understand our risk profile, and how can we start to sort of push against that so we can find the areas to create space or find inspiration and all of these magical things we've been talking about?
Gosh, that's a great one. It's in the prime section. It kind of comes from a life lesson that one of my mentors at Stanford taught me, Dr. Tina Seelig. At the time, Susanna was creating her clothing line, which at that point, it wasn't generating any money. It was just money going out the door. And, PhD students, we don't make a lot of money. We had 4 kids. We were living in this tiny, tiny, tiny apartment on campus, just going into debt. And the thing, though, about Silicon Valley that's tough for an academic is that the professors aren't the heroes. It's the entrepreneurs, it's the innovators. And so I got to this point where I just started to feel really crummy about myself. Like, gosh, if I had any courage, I would be an entrepreneur. And Tina was one of my mentors and could see I was feeling kind of down. She invited me to go to lunch. It was very generous of her. And at lunch, I kind of unburdened myself and said, Tina, if I had any courage, I'd go be an entrepreneur, but I'm just not a risk taker. And she's like, what do you mean you're not a risk taker? I said, yeah, I can't risk it all. I just can't do the financial risk of being an entrepreneur. And she said, well, wait, do you really think there's only one kind of risk? And I was like, well, what do you mean, Tina? She's like, well, in my mind, there's financial risk, there's intellectual risk, there's social risk, there's emotional risk. We could go on, right? And sure, you're not somebody who feels comfortable with a financial risk right now because, hey, you have 4 kids, everybody's depending on you and you're in debt. Like, no duh. I'm glad you're not going to take on any more financial risk. But you do seem somebody who's willing to take an intellectual risk and a social risk. And it was like in that moment, understanding where I had a risk aversion, like what was hard for me, and where I had a risk affinity was deeply insightful. And I knew immediately I had made the right choice by being a professor because I could take these social and intellectual risks, but I could, pull a salary and not be so anxious about the financial risk. And I've come now to realize if I had quit my PhD program and gone and been an entrepreneur, maybe you'd be like reading about me in jail because I had gotten so stressed out about the financial risk and done something, really untoward and unethical. But what she revealed is this principle of it's very useful to do some self-reflection and say, where do I feel really unnerved? What type of risk unnerves me? And which ones do I feel more comfortable with? And then number 1, play to your strengths and hedge your weaknesses, protect yourself a little bit. Number 2, but don't let where you have an aversion totally stop you straight. One of my favorite interviews with this entrepreneur, 8-time serial entrepreneur, hates financial risk. How in the world could he be an 8-time entrepreneur if he hates financial risk? Well, knowing that about himself, he just always lined up a consulting gig on the side that paid the bills while he started a new company. It was like he knew that about himself and he hedged it so that he didn't have to be worn down by the uncertainty of it all. And I'd say, third thing is don't let a risk aversion hold you back from what you most care about. My family, many members of my family love, Downton Abbey. And I hate Downton Abbey because to me, it's just nobody in that show will take an emotional risk. It's like if, so-and-so just said, I love you to so-and-so, everything would go well, but instead everything goes horribly and nobody will say anything. And so I always feel like, and a lot of times we can let a financial, an aversion, a risk aversion hold us back from what's most important to us. And then fourthly, the good news is you can do something about it. The way to expand your risk profile in any given area is to take small risks. So great example, one of our interviewees, very successful career, gets an opportunity to join a really well-known startup, but it's his first startup and he's really nervous. And he realizes, I've got to, in this new role, shift from avoiding risk to taking some risk. And he realized about himself that he really felt kind of an aversion to physical risk. He said, you know what? I'm going to take a kickboxing course to face up against that risk. And he said, it ended up being really fun. But it said it expanded his ability to take physical risks, but also other kind of risks. Because he realized, when you take a small risk and it goes okay, you kind of get comfortable with the next one and the next one.
I am just reminded about how powerful our beliefs are about ourselves. And so again, it's one of those Rolodex of mindsets for me where I'm like, okay, if I heard myself saying I'm just not the type of person who takes very many risks, I would then likely stop myself and say, is that belief serving me? And can I look at it in a different way? And I usually use Byron Katie's 4 questions. Is that true? Can you absolutely know that it's true? How do you react when you believe that thought? And who would you be without that thought? And so it's with the risk thing, it's am I somebody who doesn't take risks, or am I just not somebody who takes risks in this area right now? When was the last time I did take a risk? How did that turn out? When was the time I took a risk that it turned out well? And just keep going until I started to change the way that I viewed my situation, because I have found that once I do that, all the new possibilities open up for me, because it's one of my mottos that the beliefs that we have about ourselves basically create the container of what we see as possible, or basically, what we see as possible for ourselves in this lifetime.
And I love the risk profile activity too, because like you said, I think when we just say someone is a risk taker or not, it's totally missing the point. Because there are, we have a little, we included Tina's little riskometer that people can use, but those 6 things we have you rate yourself on, you could put in your own 6 things. It doesn't have to be physical or financial or emotional. It could be other things. And just getting more comfortable with the idea that we all have different aversions and affinities gets really fun. And we love to encourage people to do this as families and as couples. Like figure out, hey, where can you partner up with someone and realize, even with our little kids, like, hey, you're good at that. Will you help me with this? And it's a moment of celebration to figure out what we are good at and celebrate each other.
Yeah, because like right now, I am not the kind of person who will up and move to a random destination. I was 10 years ago, but right now it's not the time. But I am the type of person who will get certified in skydiving and raise my hand for a challenge on stage before I even know what the challenge is. So it's
Awesome.
like once you start to see yourself in different areas, then it's like, can I push that boundary a little bit? But another topic that you talked about in the prime section that you sort of touched on a few minutes ago was the uncertainty balancers. And I love this because I have certain areas of my life, and I always have, that are like very stable routines. And I think that's what's made me feel safe to push the boundaries in other areas. So what are uncertainty balancers?
Yeah, I'm sure it's helped you, because what people kept sharing with us when we did a little bit of digging, because there are so many entrepreneurs who will say,
Yeah.
I love uncertainty so much. One woman said, I eat it for breakfast. I eat uncertainty for breakfast. But the reality was, she had the same breakfast every morning because it was so important to her to have this certain granola and this certain yogurt or granola bar or something. And so she brought it with her because it gave her that sense of, yes, I can count on this one thing, because maybe the rest of her day was crazy. So what we kept finding is people who deal with a lot of uncertainty are able to give themselves comfort and security and even, that sense of calm, because they're putting in things that help them. And so these things could be routine. So the breakfast could be one, could also be people. That was one of the main ones, is having a network and a community, or like a partner where you feel seen, where you feel like, okay, everything's going nuts, but I can count on this person. One individual was saying, yeah, actually, I have such stable relationships. I can't take drama. And all my friends are from junior high, which we thought was hilarious because he was in his 50s. So people find ways of creating these moments and comforts. And it's super helpful. And so we always say, hey, you can't have too many uncertainty balancers. So add some more in.
It's funny because when I look at my life, as I said before, I kind of used to thrive on the risky decisions to my own detriment. Now that I look back, I might have been self-sabotaging a little. But when I really started to open up and take risks in the areas that were worth it for me, that were actually going to move me forward, was actually when I met my husband. And so for me, I feel like he might have been my biggest uncertainty balancer, because he sort of created this safety net for me to like be myself and not be rejected. And so I was able to just feel good being who I was. And once I stopped trying to please everybody else and try to show up as everybody else wanted me to be and be cool and follow the successful path that everyone else was laying out in their minds, and I got to just be who I was, then I was able to focus on the things that I wanted and the things that I wanted to create and take the risks that helped me get there. So I love the idea of uncertainty balancers, because it was when I read that section that I realized that that was what was necessary for me to actually do the big things that I've done in life. And so I love leaving listeners with something, an action item to focus on for the week, so that they have just one thing. We've covered a lot of different ideas, but just one thing that they can focus on and implement to sort of ground this material into their lives. So if you were going to give them one piece of homework, as you will, what would it be?
Well, we wrote about this idea called transilience, which is like beyond resilience. I mean, resilience is great, but a lot of times it carries with it this connotation of you can take a punch and stay standing. And for me, transilience is something beyond that. It's an old word. We often use it in the technology strategy world to mean this kind of leap from one state to another. So think about the moment when like an iron ingot becomes molten, or when water becomes steam. It's a phase shift moment. And I love to ask myself, one of the things I loved writing this book is asking, whenever I faced uncertainty, how do I be transilient? Which is like, how do I find the possibility in this moment? How do I let this uncertainty make me stronger, make me more creative, let me ask new questions, see the game totally differently? And so my homework would be, whether you're facing unplanned uncertainty that you don't want, and I'm sorry for that. And that's one of the hard things of being human, is we all get these things we wouldn't choose, or whether it's that you want to take a risk or you want to try something new. Whatever happens, how do you let that help you be transilient? How do you help it make you be stronger, wiser, more courageous the next time?
I love that. Well, thank you so much for all of your research around uncertainty, because as we talked about, we're all going to be hit with so many things that we did not choose. And then also, if we want to step into our best lives, usually that takes actually choosing some amount of uncertainty and risk. And so, for all the reasons, this is such useful information. And we were only able to touch on such a small portion of the 42 tools that you have mentioned in your book. So for listeners that are interested in learning more, where's the best place for them to connect and to find your book?
So yeah, we have a website. It's the upsideofuncertainty.com. And it's really fun because we also have a asynchronous course. So that's a fun option for people that like to have slides and little PowerPoint. And Nathan and I are, we show up in like 42 different outfits because we filmed it over a long, over a couple months. But we really are so curious about helping people figure out how to, like Nathan said, have these phase shift moments into living their best lives. And so there's a lot of information there. Also, just online, you can read about each of the tools and a little blurb about each one.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/310. Your challenge for this week is to plan some spontaneity in your life. That doesn't make much sense. But there's a couple ways you can do this. Either see if you can bring awareness to those times that you say no, just because you weren't expecting to do something. Maybe it's an invite. Maybe it's an idea that you have to go do something that you normally wouldn't do. And instead of saying no, see if you can just surrender to it. Your other option is to leave some space for boredom and allow creative ideas to flourish. This is something that I always try to make room for. I'll just plan time for creativity. So that might be a 30 minutes to an hour of no technology, just maybe a pen and paper. I could be laying on the ground staring at the ceiling. I could be free writing. Whatever it is to allow room for ideas to flow. So those are two ways to bring some sort of spontaneity or creativity or uncertainty into your life. Depending on what you're accessible for this week, challenge yourself to one of those. If you're looking for more ways to up-level your life, to consciously develop yourself across this next year, consider the MindLove membership. You can find out more information at mindlove.com/membership. We have tons of masterclasses in there that you can go through each month to bring a little more intention to different areas of your life. There's meditations, there's other bonuses, plus you get over 100 exclusive MindLove episodes to listen to. You can also find all of my sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. And if you love this episode, consider sharing it. Take a screenshot and tag MindLove Melissa and MindLove Podcast. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with MindLove. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.